excited but Zimbabwe dismayed over CITES convention's near total ban on sale of wild animals. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Also ahead on the program, Mozambique takes part to being one of Africa's top coffee producers. And in your sports, Ethiopia wins big in day 2 of the athletics calendar at the ongoing Africa Games in Morocco. At least 40 people are estimated to have drowned off the Libyan coast in the latest boat disaster on the Mediterranean Sea. 60 people are said to have been rescued and brought to shore in the coastal town of Al Homs, about 100 kilometers east of Tripoli. A rescue operation carried out by the Libyan Coast Guard and local fishermen has been underway since the incident occurred. The UNHCR spokesperson, Charlie Yaxley, says there is need for increased search and rescue capacity.
People may have drowned in this incident, and this comes just weeks after 150 people lost their lives in the largest Mediterranean shipwreck of this year. And it means that now more than 900 people have lost their lives across the Mediterranean this year trying to reach European shores. UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is calling for a drastic shift now in the approach to the Mediterranean. We need increased search and rescue capacity, including a return of EU state search and rescue vessels, and the lifting of NGO operations both at sea and in the air. Their efforts should be recognised and acknowledged, not criminalised nor stigmatised.
Meanwhile, countries that are part of an international agreement on trade in endangered species have agreed to limit the sale of wild elephants caught in Zimbabwe and Botswana, delighting conservationists but dismaying some of the African countries involved. CGTN's Chaum Gono has more.
The resolution approved by parties to the Convention on International Trade on Endangered Species limits exports of live elephants outside of Africa. The move has been welcomed by wildlife experts who insist the resolution is a momentous win for elephants because zoos will no longer be able to import wild-caught African elephants beyond their natural habitat.
The other day, the committee voted to ensure that African elephants stay in Africa, essentially. And there was some opposition to that. The European Union came today with some amendments to that language. The majority of the parties to CITES decided that African elephants belong in Africa. Yes, there are still some caveats. There are still some provisions of the convention that could allow some African elephants to be exported to ex situ facilities. But the bottom line is the days of sort of routine export of African elephants to the highest bidder or to a zoo in the United States or to the EU, so on and so forth, those days are over.
This change, however, allows for some exceptions relevant to Europe.
Fundamentally, the parties decided that if you're a wild African elephant, the appropriate destination for you is wild Africa. But what the European Union was most concerned about is they wanted to make it very clear in the language of the document that if they wanted to move an elephant from England to France, that they could do so, and they wouldn't have to ship the elephant back to Africa.
Some African officials, however, maintain that they should be free to do what they wished with their elephants, insisting that the new proposal will have a negative impact to their economies.
Zimbabwe has 84,000 elephants. We have a carrying capacity of 54,000 elephants. So we have 30,000 more elephants than our ecology can sustain. And the effect of this is that we now have to carry that burden and we have to carry the cost, which nobody else in the world is sharing with us.
Botswana and Zimbabwe have the world's largest populations of African elephants, with a combined total of at least 200,000 elephants. Animal advocates have welcomed the resolution, even though some feel a lot still needs to be done. Chom Hono, CGTN.
Well, Africa is this week hosting a high-level climate-themed conference in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. According to the African Union, the Conference on Climate Change and Development in Africa is a special session in preparation for African input to the UN Climate Action Summit in September. Well, let's get more on this conference in Addis Ababa. CGTN's correspondent Coletta Wanjohi is joining me from the Ethiopian capital. Coletta, what exactly is on the agenda for the climate conference in Addis, and who is participating?
Well, Beatrice, sorry, we have all stakeholders from different parts of the continent. We're talking about policymakers, we're talking about experts, scientists, and also, other people from government and all that. And the basic items on the agenda is the fact that all these countries or all the stakeholders will be taking stock of how much the African countries have done in terms of fighting the effects of climate change. And with this, there will be a recognition that a lot has been said that should be done, but not so much has been done. Because we know that after the Paris Agreement of 2015, different countries were expected to have their own contributions at national level to ensure that combined the whole globe will be able to reduce gas emissions by 45% at least in the next decade. But within Africa, the progress is still very low. So the stakeholders will also be talking about what message will they take when they go to for the climate summit in September, which will be held by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Already, Mr. Antonio Guterres has made it clear that he wants more action and less talk. So they should be able to come out with concrete decisions on how implementation of mitigation and adaptation measures will be sped up.
Coletta, the conference comes as some African countries are also battling forest fires. Are the affected countries making special appeals on this issue?
Well, the issue of special fires has also come up, and with so far individual countries have not made out or have not given out their own individual emphasis on this. But it has been a recognition during the opening session with people saying that, for example, in Africa, there should be the continent should be wary of the effect that could happen in the Congo forest, for example, which we know has about the size of about 3.3 million square kilometers in terms of size and all that. So they're saying emphasis needs to be put on the Congo forest. But beyond that, we know that NASA has released information saying that fires were seen in areas of Zambia, Tanzania, South Africa and all that. So there is caution that African countries are giving up, but with full recognition that in Africa, most of these fires, for example, people use the slash and burn, where people burn the grasslands to be able to plant and all that. But there is emphasis that this should be an issue that should be taken, especially after the Amazon event.
Well, African countries have been left behind when it comes to climate action plans. Are the policymakers, though, going to be making any common stand to present to the UN later next month?
That is the plan, Beatrice. That is the plan. But also, like we said earlier, a lot has been laid out. Different countries have signed to, for example, the Paris Agreement. We have 50 African countries that have signed and committed to put up adaptation and mitigation measures. So what we expect from here is that the policymakers will be looking at what else can be added to ensure that it cements whatever has already been decided. Because where we stand, there's no magic science at all in terms of mitigating climate change and all that. The policies are there. People know the policies. And one of the issues that have been raised is the fact that there's little political will within the African countries. This needs to be made, more vibrant or more aware. People need to be made more aware that political countries or the political state has to really put a lot of energy in terms of finances, in terms of implementation of already put out measures, and also to encourage themselves to ensure that they match the global standards in terms of climate change. So yes, policymakers will be making out statements, not new ones, but just an emphasis on whatever has already been done.
Coletta Wanjohi joining us there from Addis Ababa. The United Nations will tomorrow discuss Kenya's proposal for the Al-Shabaab terror group to be put under the same sanctions designated for Al-Qaeda and ISIL. Foreign aid donors are warning the proposal would leave millions in drought-stricken parts of Somalia without aid. Nearly 18% of the Somali population face the risk of severe hunger. UN agencies and humanitarian organizations would, however, be exempt. The exemption allows for them to safely deliver aid in territories controlled by Al-Shabaab. Somalia's envoy to the UN has also pushed back against the Kenyan proposal, and Kenya has been the target of several attacks from the militant group and sees the proposed new designation as a way to hinder the group's attacks. Member states have until Thursday morning to object to the new proposed listing. Meanwhile, Somalia's government has postponed the inauguration of the new mayor of Mogadishu over fears of Al-Shabaab attacks. Well, let's broaden this discussion a little bit and get more on this developing story. I'm joined by Mr. Ali in studio here. Thank you for joining us here on the program. First of all, explain to us why Kenya is looking for this proposal in regard to Al-Shabaab.
Well, Beatrice, Kenya is looking to escalate its war against Al-Shabaab by having Al-Shabaab listed under the 1267 regime. The 1267 regime is the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1267, which is of counter-terrorism in nature, which actually lists, once a group is listed under 1267, then the sanctions on those groups and the individuals associated with those terrorist groups are tighter and stricter. Right now, Somalia is under UN sanctions, but it's under a sanction as any other country that is under armed conflict.
Well, aid agencies have raised some concerns here regarding the impact that this would have on humanitarian assistance to Somalia. But on the part of Al-Shabaab, though, how will this affect Al-Shabaab's ability to carry out further attacks?
Well, it does not stop Al-Shabaab immediately from carrying out attacks. What it does is that over time, it diminishes, it degrades Al-Shabaab's ability to access funding, to access monies that is transferred within Somalia and majorly from outside of Somalia. So that's what Kenya is really hoping for. And
what is the objection, though, from the side of the donor aid and the humanitarian groups, because what is informing their objections?
1267 is much stricter and tighter. It's a kind of a counter-terrorism tool that is used by states, and it kind of suffocates not just the terrorist group itself, but also innocent people that are there. And therein lies the problem. It's the United Nations officials that are actually objecting, some of them objecting to this a move by Kenya. 1267 is a creation of the United Nations itself. Now, it tells you that there is a problem with the way UN and other states are actually countering terrorism. There is a lot of a negative effect, collateral damage to civilians that are supposed to be protected in the first place from those terrorist groups.
Kenya is looking at Al-Qaeda and looking at ISIL as some of the examples, and they want Al-Shabaab put in the same terror group as Al-Qaeda and ISIL. What impact have sanctions, though, had on the activities of the two mentioned groups?
They have had a tremendous impact, particularly on the more transnational terrorist organizations like ISIS, Al-Qaeda and others. They are unable to access funding. It's much more difficult for individuals or organizations or states that sponsor terrorism to transfer funds to those particular groups. And Kenya would like to see Al-Shabaab being put in that category.
Dr. Mustafa Ali, thank you very much for joining us on Africa Live. Meanwhile, the Under-Secretary for UN Counter-Terrorism, Vladimir Voronkov, says vigilance is key in efforts to mitigate the risk posed by the evolution of ISIL and its affiliates, deny its new recruits and prevent its resurgence. The UN Counter-Terrorism chief made the remarks while briefing the Security Council on the threat posed by ISIL to international peace and security. Voronkov noted that despite its territorial defeat in the Syrian Arab Republic in March of 2019, ISIL continues to aspire to global relevance. He further insists that it is essential that member states keep a comprehensive and long-term perspective in this fight.
Acute concerns also remain about the challenges posed by foreign terrorist fighters, returnees and relocators. Between 24,000 and 30,000 of which have survived from the initial estimate of 40,000. Member states also have to contend with the threat posed by frustrated travelers, the number of which is hard to estimate.
Kenya's largest referral hospital, the Kenyatta National Hospital, is today scheduled to discharge a baby who was born at 400 grams after a 5-month hospital stay. The baby's survival marks a milestone for the East African country. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa now joins us on phone from Nairobi with an update on that story. Wilkista, tell us a bit more from the briefing by the Kenyatta National Hospital about the status of this baby.
Good afternoon, Beatrice. Well, the process of discharging the baby is actually currently ongoing. This baby, now named Baby Jeremiah, was born on April 1st and has been in hospital during all this time. He was born at 24 weeks, which was very early, and at the time of his birth, he weighed 400 grams. He is only the second baby who has been born at this weight at this facility and who has survived. The previous one is a baby called Baby Hope, who is currently 8 years old. So it has been a milestone because at this point, they did say that the chances of survival were pretty slim, but that medics at the hospital did work together with the parents, just trying to give the best care that they could give to this baby to ensure his survival. He now weighs 3.5 kilograms, and he is the third child in his family, the others being 10 years and 7 years old. So later this afternoon, he will be going home with his parents and his two older brothers, and this just marks a milestone for this facility because it does mean that the chances of survival for such babies are higher than previously thought. Beatrice.
So, Wilkista, it is a milestone for the hospital, but also a very exciting moment for the parents of the child. What are the parents saying?
The parents are very excited, and they did speak about it because they actually spoke about the difficulties that they had faced in this journey because from what we understand, the mother went into, she started bleeding at 22 weeks, and at this point she really quite despaired. But then she came into the hospital, she was admitted, and all through, even when she went into labor and delivered the baby, she did say that just the members of staff did encourage her, and at the time it didn't seem that it would be possible that she would be living with her baby, but today she's very excited. She and the members of staff here at the hospital have cut a cake marking this day together with the other children. She did bring her first and second children here to also mark the occasion together with her husband and close friends. So it is a day when they are very excited, tears of joy and excitement, and just she calls this really the beginning of the rest of their life because now they will be taking the baby with them and that they will be hoping to mark the normal developmental milestones with the baby. So the baby will receive immunization jabs just like other babies, and they will also be watching for other milestones, for the baby to sit, for the baby to walk when it is time for him to walk, and basically they hope that from now on it will just be a normal course for their miracle baby.
A miracle baby indeed. Wilkista Nyabwa there. You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. A Nigerian startup makes 3D prosthetic limbs for amputee victims of militant attacks. And a UN agency's Cash for Shelter project changes lives of refugees and their hosts in Kenya.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
China has rejected allegations that Beijing is embarking on global economic expansion through the Belt and Road Initiative. This was in response to a question from reporters as U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton visited Ukraine. Bolton said that he would warn Ukraine, a U.S. ally, about the dangers of cooperating with China.
中方对博尔顿先生抹黑“一带一路”合作。
We strongly oppose Bolton's remarks smearing the Belt and Road Initiative and his attempts to sow discord among China and other countries. Frankly speaking, we are not surprised by his words. China is cooperating with more than 160 countries, including Ukraine, under the Belt and Road Initiative. We uphold the principles of mutual discussion, working together, and exchange of information. We believe most countries can independently make decisions that serve their own interests.
Well, Hong Kong police say they have been closely following the violent incidents in the city in the past 2 months. Police say some of the weapons they found during investigations, which the violent protesters use, are quite dangerous.
In the past 2 months, we arrested almost 900 people. And for the proof and evidence we found one concern. For the radical protesters, they keep escalating the violence. They're using offensive weapons. Some of them are quite fatal, and they're taking the criminal actions in different districts in Hong Kong. And some of the protesters, they're taking extreme violent actions to the others. We want the public members to be noticed about their actions.
The ongoing protests and violence in Hong Kong are not spontaneous events, but as facts show, are well organized. Our next report explains.
Over 40 protests within 2 months. And former Hong Kong Law Society President Ho Kwon Yu says they're all connected. Protesters are using social networks as platforms to coordinate events. Telegram became the 7th most downloaded instant messaging app in Hong Kong when it gained around 110,000 new users in July. Protesters have flocked to the app to keep in touch with other demonstrators in the city. And usage of LIHKG, a message board that operates like Reddit, surged tenfold from the year before. Data from non-profit organization the Counter-Extremism Project shows that Telegram is favored by terror groups like ISIL. The group has made use of Telegram's encrypted messaging feature to recruit new members, fundraise, and even to coordinate extremist activities. According to an anonymous document obtained by the newspaper Global Times, writers in Hong Kong used over 40 pages to lay out detailed counter-police strategies, including how to use chemical liquids when clashed with police. And a New York Times report showed the behind-the-scene organizations of the writers.
Do you know what is GTA? No. We love GTA so much. Yeah. Yes, and now in Hong Kong we're playing a real GTA.
But clear methods of organization and inspiration from video games aren't the only telling signs. Hall says the protests couldn't have happened without planning from the top down.
60多天里头有40多起的大型的游行活动，肯定后面是有大台的。如果没有做一个总指挥，没有人做这个总统筹，根本这个事情没办法做得行的。
The legislator believes the violence to be jointly plotted by anti-government and external forces, telling insights as disruptions in Hong Kong still have no clear end in sight. Zhang Dan, CGTN.
In Nigeria, a technology startup company is printing a 3D prosthetic limbs. This move aims to help out amputees who have been brutally scarred by criminal gangs and militant groups. CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy with more details.
25-year-old Mohammed Jaffa lost his left hand in January this year as he tried to rescue a teenage girl who was kidnapped by a criminal gang. Jaffa was part of a vigilante group that was formed to protect his neighborhood in northern Nigeria. He recently got fitted with a 3D printed prosthetic arm and is now able to earn a living as a tailor.
This limb has helped in reducing the humiliation I used to feel. When I put it on, it covers the part that was cut off from my arm, and most people cannot differentiate the limb and my real arm. It helps me to do some activities.
Like Jaffa, many other amputees living in northeast Nigeria now have access to prosthetics thanks to a team of developers at Yola's Northeast Humanitarian and Innovation Hub. The hub was set up in 2018 by the Nigerian government so as to encourage teach enthusiasts to find innovative ways of solving some of the region's social problems.
It's not just printing the limbs, but also now adding robotics to it to improve functionality. So with robotics, you now have sensors coming in within which model of thought is designed and transmitted for the user.
Many of the victims in the area have lost their limbs as a result of the conflict and insecurity that has been ongoing for over a decade. The militant group Boko Haram has over a decade continued to wage an insurgency campaign against the government. Most of those that have fallen victim of the insurgency cannot afford to buy prosthetics as they are costly. 3D printing reduces the cost of production compared to conventionally manufactured prosthetics and is also said to offer advanced functionality. The set of 3D printed prosthetics offered at his hub cost about $1,000, but the team has managed to give out 6 prosthetics for free in the region.
The lab itself hasn't really been operational for more than like 2 months, and we're already impacting close to 6 kids with limbs, including I think a police officer also who lost his limb in the line of duty. We've also provided a 3D limb for him. So it's much cheaper, much cheaper.
Unlike basic prosthetics, the 3D prosthetics are controlled by the movement of muscles prompted by the brain, allowing neuro influence. Developers at Yola's Northeast Humanitarian and Innovation Hub say more is still being done to improve the prosthetics further, such as adding more sensors that can detect temperature. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN.
The Cash for Shelter project by the UN Refugee Agency is helping to empower refugees and their hosts in Kenya. Under the scheme, UNHCR uses cash assistance to help refugees in Kalobeyei settlement to construct durable and permanent shelters while reducing dependency on aid. This is meant to provide a shift from the traditional refugee camp planning process.
The UN Refugees Agency's cash assistance project started in 2016, but began 2 years later in Kalobeyei camp in Kenya. It looks to ensure socio-economic integration of refugees in local community, while reducing dependency on humanitarian aid. In Kalobeyei camp, around 12 to 14 houses can be built in an average of 22 days.
The refugees will be able to buy materials from any supplier. Most of the supplier currently are the host community, and also the masons are both the refugees and the host community.
Refugees also have access to banking services, benefiting the local economy and improving social coexistence. 25-year-old Florence Idiongo is one of the beneficiaries. She fled South Sudan in 2016.
This is my bed, and this bed is for my children. So I really very happy with my house. You buy clothes to the children, and you will buy also mattress, chairs, curtain inside there, and you will feel okay as now people relax.
In the past 3 years, the project has assisted more than 16 million people in 100 countries to build or improve their homes. Chom Hono, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Mozambique takes a path to being one of Africa's top coffee producers. And the national flag carrier Kenya Airways reports increased losses.
No war, no one again. He can hold his gun. He can complete word protesting.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Mozambique could be on its way to becoming one of Africa's major coffee producers, thanks to a major increase of coffee production on Mount Gorongosa. The presence of Renamo rebels at the top of the mountain had been restricting the expansion of coffee and other agriculture. But with the recently signed peace agreement, there are plans to dramatically scale up coffee production. Coffee giant Nespresso has already taken an interest in the project.
Quarida Berenikwa intently sorts through the coffee beans. She's one of 400 Mozambican farmers producing coffee to earn an income while helping reforest Mount Gorongosa.
I like growing coffee because it earns cash that goes right into my pocket, which allows me to buy all household items. It's very useful. I would love my kids to have hope in terms of growing coffee because it offers a source of hope.
This hope came after Mozambique's government and Renamo rebels signed a peace agreement in early August.
After the political situation calmed down, we were able to initiate the scaling phase, and that's what we're in now. We're in an exponential growth phase. So we started with this 40,000 trees, which is what the coffee that's produced behind me, that's where that comes from, is this pilot phase. And now, this year, we've already planted 300,000 coffee trees.
Experts also see the climate around Mount Gorongosa as ideal for better tasting coffee beans.
This is an effort to grow this very high quality premium commodity for the community, and at the same time inter-row crop with staple food products, staple food crops, and this agroforestry system. So this is native hardwood trees planted alongside the coffee trees. And what that does is it provides this shade, about 60-40% shade for the coffee, and that creates this really high quality coffee, big beans, delicious coffee beans.
Mozambique is not considered to be one of Africa's major coffee producers like Ethiopia and Kenya. But Mount Gorongosa's unique climate makes it very promising. Chamhono, CGTN.
Kenya Airways has reported a loss that is more than double what it reported last year for the half year to June 2019. The company is in the red to the tune of $83 million. While announcing its results for the last financial year, the carrier said its first half revenue rose 12.2% from a year earlier to $566 million. The airline attributes the growth to the launch of new routes and more frequent flights. However, the airline's operating costs rose partly due to 2 Boeing 787 planes that had been subleased to Oman Air being returned during the first half of the year. According to the airline, investments in new strategic routes such as New York, Mauritius, Libreville and Mogadishu delivered a 6.6% increase in passenger numbers during the period to hit 2.4 million. The airline is being renationalized to save it from mounting debts. In neighboring Uganda, the national carrier Uganda Airlines is back to business after nearly 2 decades of non-existence. The airline made its first flight to the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, earlier on Tuesday. The flag carrier is also set to make other flights to Somalia, Tanzania, Burundi and South Sudan. With the details, here's CGTN's Isabel Nakiria.
After a long absence, Uganda Airlines is back off the ground. The inaugural flight to Nairobi had government officials and journalists on board.
We shall straight away go for intercontinental flights to a few high-volume destinations of travelers to and from Uganda. There has never been a better time to commence commercial operations than now, when passenger traffic is growing, given the increasing demand for Uganda tourism.
And President Yoweri Museveni calls the airline a symbol of national pride. After 18 years, Uganda's national carrier is flying again with the first flight to Nairobi's Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. The airline says this will be the most busy route. Fares on the Entebbe-Nairobi route have been among the most expensive in the region, with the ticket going for as high as $600. Uganda Airlines will be having promotional flights, with some fares dropping to around $200. The government says travel throughout the region will become simpler.
With Uganda Airlines, our friends all over the world can now enjoy uninterrupted service across the region. Flying in the region is going to be much easier, better, and I believe more comfortable.
Uganda Airlines was grounded nearly 2 decades ago over financial mismanagement. The government hopes the airline will be more financially secure once oil revenues begin to flow into the country. But competition is also expected from regional airlines like Kenya and Rwanda Airways, which fly the same routes.
Take the bull by the horns and make sure that this airline is successful. Government will give you all the support that you need because it is a national airline.
The country has ordered 2 more Bombardier aircrafts to arrive later this year. 2 Airbus jetliners have also been purchased. The government hopes the revival of the airline will facilitate trade and promote tourism in the region. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Entebbe.
A landmark ruling on drug maker Johnson & Johnson on Monday is expected to pave way for similar suits against other drug makers as the U.S. battles an opioid crisis. The company was fined $572 million. More than 130 million people in the United States die of an opioid overdose daily. Opioid addiction is a serious national crisis that is affecting public health as well as social and economic welfare. CGTN's Alexandria Majala has more.
An Oklahoma judge on Monday found Johnson & Johnson and its subsidiaries helped fuel the state's opioid crisis and ordered the consumer products giant to pay $572 million. The fine is more than twice the amount another drug manufacturer agreed to pay in a settlement.
I think what's important looking ahead is both how this case might shape other cases that are pending. Most of them have been consolidated before a federal judge in Ohio. And also what that money will be used for. That will be very important.
This ruling followed the first state opioid case to make it to trial and could help shape negotiations for over roughly 1,500 similar lawsuits filed by state, local, and tribal governments consolidated before a federal judge in Ohio. However, Johnson & Johnson's attorneys say that they plan to appeal the ruling to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. Before the Oklahoma trial began in May, the state had reached settlements with 2 other defendant groups. A $270 million deal with OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma and an $85 million settlement with Israeli-owned Teva Pharmaceutical Industries. The state argued that the companies and their subsidiaries created a public nuisance by launching an aggressive and misleading marketing campaign that overstated how effective the drugs were for treating chronic pain and understated the risk of addiction.
Now that kind of law is typically used for things like a bar that's too rowdy and it bothers the neighbors, or maybe a company is discharging pollution into a waterway that's used by the public. So this was kind of a unique legal tactic that's being closely watched.
Oklahoma Attorney General Mike Hunter says opioid overdoses killed 4,653 people in the state from 2007 to 2017. Hunter called Johnson & Johnson a kingpin company that was motivated by greed. He specifically pointed to 2 former Johnson & Johnson subsidiaries, Noramco and Tasmanian Alkaloids, which produce much of the raw opium used by other manufacturers to produce the drugs. Law experts say that the Oklahoma case could provide a roadmap for other states to follow in holding drug makers responsible for the opioid crisis. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Now, driving without a steering wheel is still a far-fetched dream. But for many, the goal is a driving car that's more complex than just a smart cockpit. Are auto companies ready to make that happen? CGTN's Xia Cheng finds out.
Smart Cockpit is your assistant on the road. You can ask the AI to find a place, adjust a seat, and occasionally drive for you. Are consumers jumping on this interim product's bandwagon?
We might still need to wait to 2030, around somewhere there.
that we can see a very substantial breakthrough into a very advanced level of autonomous driving. If we calculate by hardware, by operating system, and also by some of the, the very specific technology, usually we say that in China the market size is about 100 billion RMB. And also globally, the size is about 400 billion RMB. And if we look at the market size, market growth, and generally we believe that until 2025, I think it's about 11%. And from 2025 to 2030, we believe the growth rate is about 7%. So comparing with the cars, I think it's still pretty good.
Data is essential for artificial intelligence, and China has a lot of data, especially for autonomous driving research. Just look at the crazy traffic in Shanghai and Beijing, the complex road systems, and sometimes wild driving styles here. You know this is the country for more sophisticated autonomous driving research, and local companies are capitalizing on that advantage. Meet NIO, a New York Stock Exchange-listed Chinese auto company. It makes electric cars and invests in its own AI technology.
Smart cockpit is vital for NIO. Our teams in both China and the US are working on it together. Different from buying smart auto parts and systems from others, our strategy is developing our own AI systems, so we control our technologies. Initially, it was huge investment. Now it has paid off as we hear positive feedback from our customers.
NIO wants to turn cars into mobile lounge rooms that run on data.
Consumers now believe that cars must be intelligent. With data, smart cars can improve themselves day after day. Like our ESA model, its battery system self-improves every day with data it collects, and the software system upgrades and adds on new functions with every use. This type of cars become better products with time, in terms of both hardware and software.
That means there will be hardly any dominator in the market, as traditional automakers are strong in hardwares and tech companies are leading in AI systems.
I would say both of the parties want to do a lot of things with the customer, so they're gaming with each other. And also you see some of the OEMs, they have built up a very strong internal supplier base. Also, we see some of the some of the suppliers, they want to go to the car making business as well.
That level of competition is likely to extend the auto value chain as more suppliers are getting involved, especially as automakers are expanding their AI power from the cockpit to the entire car. That means those who want to win the race will keep investing in production capacity for speedier manufacturing and cheaper autonomous driving cars. Xia Cheng, CGTN, Beijing.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. We'll be telling you why Ghana's mourners and art collectors would pay anything for the elaborate fantasy coffins.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Funerals in Ghana are generally an elaborate affair, and the coffins of the deceased can be just as extravagant. Known as fantasy coffins, these custom-made creations are highly sought after, not only by mourners but also by art collectors. CGTN's Daniela Pearson has more.
72-year-old Pajo from Ghana first started making funeral caskets in 1962, but today he specializes in making fantasy coffins. They are known as Abebu Adekai in the Ga language, which means the receptacle of proverbs.
Any design I create shows the work the deceased was doing while alive. Maybe the person was a pilot, then the coffin for his burial will be an airplane coffin. Once the airplane coffin is displayed at the funeral grounds, everyone will know that the deceased was a pilot. That's why we do it this way, so that everyone at the burial knows what the deceased did with their lives.
Some may label him a carpenter, but Joe has always considered himself an artist who sculpts with wood. He says the coffins are traditionally displayed before the burial to celebrate the life of the departed.
So these kind of things, if you go for a funeral and you see it displayed, you might think it's a joke, but it isn't a joke. It isn't a joke at all because it represents your profession and you must live with the same, hence the reason it will be used to bury you in. So when you go to the funeral, you might think it's a joke, but the deceased is inside this coffin.
Over the years, Joe's caskets have been bought by presidents, exhibited in art galleries around the world, and are regularly photographed. Museums have even commissioned pieces from him, making Pa Joe one of the most renowned coffin makers in the world. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
To South Africa now, where the color pink is playing a critical role in keeping water and beach users safe around the country's coastline. The Pink Rescue Buoy project is an initiative being spearheaded by the country's volunteer sea rescue service, the NSRI. The project uses specially colored pink rescue buoys for high visibility to help reduce the high number of drownings. CGTN's Travis Andrews has this report.
With the coastline stretching more than 2,800 kilometers, South Africa is one of many countries that have to keep a close eye on all sorts of water users. Drip-gun drownings is sadly a common occurrence, especially where there are no lifeguards on duty. But the National Sea Rescue Institute has come up with a novel way of trying to save lives. They call it the Pink Rescue Buoy, and it's stationed where beach users are most active. It's meant to be highly visible in the surf zone and hold a weight of at least 3 people.
In fact, started with pool noodles, you won't believe it. But that evolved very quickly into the Pink Rescue Buoy project. So that was the kind of brief evolution. Pink is obviously a very emotive color. It has a very positive kind of image in society, and I mean, practically it's a very visible color. So it's just fitted the project fantastically.
Today there are 435 Pink Rescue Buoys stationed around the country, where water users are most active. It's meant to be tossed at someone in the water in need of help. For some beach users, the device has already proven indispensable.
Been used in 43 successful rescues, which we're extremely proud of. It's an amazing thing that a simple piece of plastic and how to call for help and so on that is printed on the graphics on the signboard has helped to save 43 people.
As a proudly South African invention, the Pink Rescue Buoy project's success lies not only with the NSRI's commitment to keep sea users safe, but also with private donations that pay for the devices to be made. The Pink Rescue Buoys have been such a successful innovation that even other countries are testing it as one of the alternative life-saving devices to be installed along their coastlines.
I think it'll go very quickly into a lot of countries. I mean, Australia, one of them. But you know, it's been recognized by the IMRF and other organizations around the world, and I think that'll help distribute the kind of awareness. And hopefully, you know, with Hawaii's very similar project, this will become universal everywhere in the world and be adopted in many, many life-saving services and countries.
For now, the life-saving device stands at the ready at beaches, harbors and inlets as that all-important measure of safety that no beach users should be without. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
And let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. Ethiopian athletes claim track and field medals at the ongoing African Games in Morocco.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's now turn our attention to the African Games in Morocco, where Ethiopian athletes raced to the medal podium in the final of the men's 10,000 meters final. Ethiopians faced a tough fight against Kenyans and Eritreans in the 25-lap